The Sten gun was never meant to be loved. It wasn't designed to be beautiful or comfortable or even impressive. It was designed to exist, because in 1940, Britain was desperate. France had collapsed. The British Army had escaped Dunkirk, but they left behind mountains of equipment, rifles, machine guns, ammunition, vehicles, everything. And now, Britain had to prepare for the worst, an invasion. The problem was simple. Britain didn't have enough guns, not enough rifles, not enough submachine guns, not enough anything. So the British did something that sounds insane today. They built a weapon that was cheap, crude, and fast to manufacture. A weapon that could be stamped out of metal and welded together like a plumbing project. And they called it the Sten. A tube, a bolt, a simple trigger group, and a magazine sticking out the side like an afterthought. No fancy wood, no careful machining, no pride, just function. And in a war, function is everything. The Sten became one of the most widely produced weapons of the entire war. Commandos carried it, paratroopers carried it, tank crews carried it, resistance fighters carried it. If you needed something compact, something you could carry in tight spaces, something that could fire fast at close range, the Sten was it. But the Sten had a problem so common that soldiers joked about it like it was guaranteed. They called it Stoppage Every Nine, because in combat, at the worst possible moment, it would jam. And when a gun jams, it doesn't just fail. It turns into dead weight. Picture it. You're in a shattered street, smoke in the air, bricks and dust everywhere. Your heart is pounding so hard you can feel it in your throat. You see movement ahead, someone stepping into view. You raise the Sten, squeeze the trigger. And instead of a burst of fire, you get a click or one weak shot. Then nothing. In that moment, you don't think about engineering. You don't think about magazines. You don't think about springs. You think, I'm about to die. That's why soldiers hated jamming weapons, because a jam feels like betrayal, like your own gun abandoned you. For decades, people blamed the Sten itself. They said it was a junk weapon, a cheap piece of scrap metal that Britain handed out because it didn't care. But here's the truth. The Sten didn't jam because it was cursed. It jammed because of one specific weak point. And it wasn't the barrel, it wasn't the bullets, it wasn't even the bolt. It was the magazine. The magazine is the part most people never think about. But it's the heart of any automatic weapon, and the Sten's magazine design was delicate. It fed from the side, not from the bottom like many other guns. That one choice created problems that followed the Sten everywhere it went. To understand why, you need to know what's happening inside the gun. The Sten is an open-bolt weapon. That means when it's ready to fire, the bolt sits locked back. When you pull the trigger, the bolt slams forward under spring pressure. It strips a round from the magazine, chambers it, and fires it instantly, all in one violent movement. It's simple, and simplicity is good. Until it isn't, because that bolt is moving fast, and it needs the next round to be in the exact right position every single time. If the round is sitting even slightly wrong, if it's tilted, if it's low, if it's angled, the bolt doesn't feed it cleanly. It hits it wrong, and that creates the stoppage. Now here's the detail that made the Sten so frustrating. The magazine stuck out the side, which meant it was always exposed, always vulnerable, and even worse, it became the perfect thing for soldiers to grab. Because in combat, people don't hold weapons the way manuals want them to. They hold them the way their body chooses under stress. The Sten had a barrel shroud, but it wasn't always comfortable to grip. The magazine was right there. So soldiers held the Sten by the magazine like a handle. It felt stable, it felt natural. But the magazine wasn't meant to be a handle. It wasn't built to be twisted, pushed, pulled, or leaned on. Even slight pressure could shift the magazine angle just enough that the rounds stopped feeding properly. So the Sten would fire fine until the moment you changed your grip, or bumped the magazine, or braced it against cover. Then, suddenly, click, stoppage. And the soldier thinks, this gun is trash. But often it wasn't the gun. It was the feeding system. And the feeding system depended on a magazine that didn't like being treated like a grip. Now add the conditions of war. These magazines weren't stored gently in clean armories. They were carried through mud, dropped into sand, bashed into walls, crushed in pockets, stepped on, thrown into bags. And the Sten magazine didn't forgive abuse, because the most important part of the magazine is the feed lips, those two thin pieces of metal at the top that control how each bullet rises. If the feed lips are bent even slightly, the rounds sit wrong. One round might sit too high, another might sit too low, and the bolt slams forward and hits the round like a shovel hitting a rock. Instead of feeding smoothly, it jams hard. Now imagine trying to clear that jam in a firefight. Hands shaking, sweat in your eyes, gloves or freezing fingers, the sound of bullets cracking past your head. That's not a minor inconvenience. That's life and death. And the Sten's reputation came from thousands of moments like that, moments where it failed when it mattered most. But here's the part that makes the Sten story more interesting. The Sten was never supposed to be perfect. It was supposed to be cheap. Britain needed numbers, not elegance. The Sten could be made quickly and for a fraction of the cost of other submachine guns. That meant Britain could arm more men. And in 1941, that mattered more than anything. A weapon that sometimes jammed was still better than a soldier with nothing. And because the Sten was so simple, soldiers did what soldiers always do. They adapted. They learned the real problem, and they learned how to reduce it. The first fix was basic. Stop holding the weapon by the magazine. Hold it by the barrel shroud, or grip it properly forward. That one change alone reduced stoppages, not completely, but enough that experienced troops noticed the difference. The second fix was maintenance. Soldiers learned that Sten magazines were not just magazines. They were fragile, so they kept them clean, wiped them out, kept them away from mud when they could. And some units did something smart. They marked the magazines that worked best, because once you find a magazine that feeds perfectly, you protect it like it's gold. The third fix was inspection. If a magazine started causing stoppages, soldiers learned to check the feed lips. If they were bent, that magazine was trouble. Some would try to gently adjust them. Others didn't risk it and just threw that magazine out of rotation, because a damaged magazine could turn a working Sten into a jam machine. And there was another trick some men used. They didn't always load magazines to full capacity, not because the Sten couldn't handle it, but because overloading could increase friction and feeding issues in rough conditions. So leaving 1 or 2 rounds out could sometimes make feeding smoother. Again, this wasn't magic. But in war, small advantages matter, because a gun that jams less is a gun that keeps you alive longer. Now, the Sten story doesn't end with British troops, because the Sten became something bigger. It became a weapon of the shadows. Resistance fighters loved it because it was easy to hide, easy to smuggle, easy to use. and it fired 9mm, ammo that could often be found or stolen. The Sten wasn't a hero gun, but it gave ordinary people the ability to fight back, and that made it terrifying. In fact, the Sten was so simple that even the enemy copied it. The Germans produced their own versions because the design was easy to replicate. Think about that. A weapon that soldiers mocked was still so useful the enemy wanted it too. That's the real truth about the Sten. It wasn't glamorous, but it was effective enough. And when you zoom out, you realize something important. Britain didn't win because the Sten was flawless. Britain won because the Sten existed. Because it could be produced fast. Because it could be shipped in huge numbers. Because it gave troops something, anything that could fire quickly in close combat. And yes, it jammed. But the reason it jammed wasn't just bad quality. It was a fragile magazine, a sideways feeding system, and a human instinct. To grab the nearest thing when bullets start flying. That's why the Sten jammed. And once soldiers understood that, they stopped treating it like a normal gun. They treated it like what it really was, a cheap emergency weapon. That demanded discipline, because the Sten could work, but only if you respected the one part that mattered most. Not the barrel, not the bolt, not the trigger, the magazine. And in the middle of a war, that small piece of metal was the difference between a weapon that fired and a weapon that got you killed.